Watch out, let me get a shot. Where they at? Where they at?
On that rooftop. Hey! Give me a fucking 42 in here,
We're east of the riverbed, and we're taking fire from the west. Roger, stand by, we're popping smoke. Gun runs north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Our guest today is Coleman Ruiz, a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, SEAL officer, and decorated combat leader with multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He has had a very successful post-Navy business career and is involved in several causes that we will discuss in great depth during today's episode. Coleman, welcome to the Combat Leadership Podcast.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Honored to be here and great to be with the audience.
Well, the intro, you get a very rich background, Coleman. The intro didn't do you justice. Can you give us about a minute more of what we need to know about Coleman?
Yeah, I mean, the quick, very slightly personal version, I guess, is grew up in New Orleans, pretty much wrestled my whole life as a younger kid and didn't know the difference between officers and enlisted folks when I was recruited to go to the Naval Academy. I just thought, as I often describe it, I was going in the Navy. I didn't know what you went in the Navy for. And I was around, as you know, Mike, at a place like a service academy. I mean, the first person I met, I had to go to prep school before I went to the Naval Academy. And the first person I met was a gunny sergeant. And the rest is history. You're surrounded by these legends. And when it was time to select, I was frankly torn between going to TBS and going into the SEAL teams. And growing up in New Orleans and being around water, and I really was attracted, frankly, to like the heavy maritime nature of being in the SEAL teams. And then that turned into being in when we were in. I mean, I checked into SEAL Team 3 in 99. 9/11 happened 2 years later, and then I never did any Gucci deployments to any of the nice places.
Well, I remember pre 9/11, I retired in 98, but one of the things I always remember about the SEALs, I love SEALs. They were always incredibly physically capable guys, but I remember at one point, I would say late 80s onward, they became like professional triathletes. I mean, these guys were, they had guys in the ranks that were seriously like national level triathlete competitors. And I'm sure you caught the tail end of that.
Yeah, a little bit. It's funny you bring that up, Mike, because there was a phase late 80s into the late 90s where there was certainly a lot. I don't want to say nothing was going on because things were going on. There was a lot less going on than certainly we had post 9/11. And maybe it's being in San Diego. I have no idea. Maybe it's being around the water, but there were quite a few guys who raced in this competition called CISM, Competition du Sport Militaire in French. And that generated a lot of energy just behind that side of like the military world-class athletes program that a bunch of guys went into. In fact, one of my favorite guys ever was a retired Master Chief named Lucky Verlinde. He lives out on the West Coast now, but Lucky, he raced in CISM a bunch of times. And just one quick memory about Lucky, just to highlight the example you gave, is Lucky started his career on submarines and came into the teams. I'm not sure when he went through Buzz, but it had to be mid to late 70s. And I went running with Lucky one day. We're exactly 30 years apart in age. He was 55 and I was 25. And we ran around Coronado at like max tempo together. And I'm thinking like, this guy's 55 years old and he was absolutely flat out. And Lucky was just a great human.
Well, I've had some experiences like that. Not that I could have run with either of you as I was a Clydesdale, but you know, when you get around someone like that, that's when you realize there is such a thing as genetic gifts. And if those guys take those genetic gifts and work hard, they often are something that mere mortals are never going to equal, you know.
There's no question.
I mean, at 55, I was just happy to be running. I'm sure I wasn't running his pace, you know.
Yeah. I was barely running his pace at 25, so.
Yeah, those are humblers, but it's a wake-up call. Well, listen, I always ask everybody that comes on the podcast if some young ROTC cadet or young warrior, young frogman came up and said, Coleman, what's your philosophy on combat leadership? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, Mike. There's a couple things, because when I went back to San Diego as a BUDS instructor, I ran 5 Hell Week classes in 2005 as the first phase. That's the first phase of our training. I was the first phase OIC at the time. And you know what struck me, Mike, so I checked into SEAL Team 3 in 99. I was a platoon commander on the invasion of Iraq. We were actually embedded with the 1st Marine Division, I think when General Mattis was a 1-star. And that was, of course, the spring of 2003. And then I went to graduate school up in Monterey, and I'm catching us up to 2005 here. And then I was a first phase instructor at BUDS in Coronado in 05. And so I had done multiple deployments, 1 combat tour. I would obviously subsequently go back to do a bunch more. But so one of the things I would tell young officers and young enlisted guys coming through BUDS, and I wondered why people didn't talk about it like this more, and maybe it's just my style. But the first thing I would say is, remember that it's not that people were looking at it like a video game, but there seemed to be a general conversation about, what we did overseas. And the first thing I reminded people of, when you come into this training, if you're going to go to a ground combat unit, the only thing the other team wants to do is blow your head off.
Yeah. Do
you understand that that's your job? And so I'm not convinced, Mike, that I'm not convinced I understood that at 18. And so I'm not taking a shot at the students, but the first philosophy was you have to understand that this is a very violent, aggressive, and risky profession. And I think just knowing that ahead of time can be very useful. And when I think back on it, there's multiple guys that I met in my development who never sat me down and said anything like that so bluntly, so that was number one. The other thing that I learned along the way is that it goes without saying that combat is not what we see on TV, and it's not what we see in movies, and it's not what we see in video games. It is a tremendously chaotic environment, way beyond the chaos that BUDS can generate, that TBS can generate, that IOC can generate. When the first round gets clacked off and stuff starts happening in the field, it's more chaotic than you think it is. And it's going to require, probably more than anything else, Mike, as like a general umbrella about how to approach the expectation of going into combat, whether combat leadership or not, is that my experience is that a lot of the level of commitment, just like in a wrestling match for me, but the level of commitment that you bring to a particular gunfight or whatever is heavily dependent on the cost that you're willing to accept, right? And we don't always think about that up front either, which is all to say that on any given night, when the what hits the fan, even some of the most skilled warriors, I probably did it too, we can see some stutter stepping at times in a given situation, because you realize that certain situations and certain actions can cost you a lot more than other things. And so philosophically speaking, I'll wrap up this point, but I just wanted to bring those up first, because it's like how chaotic, how aggressive, and how violent the situation is. And a lot of your ability to enter that situation effectively is predicated on what are you willing to pay?
Yeah, I agree with that. Part of the reason why we're doing this podcast and your particular episode is to slap young people in the face, so to speak, and maybe even shock them with, hey, this is not a video game. And that sadly, some people listening to this podcast over the next 50 or 75 years, I don't know what the internet's going to look like 25, 50 years from now, Coleman, but this episode will be out there. And someone that's going to listen to you today is going to lose their life in combat. Or even more, may get horribly maimed. And I'll tell you, for me, the wake-up call that I got was as a young enlisted Marine. I knew many Vietnam vets. There were World War II vets in the ranks when I enlisted in the Marine Corps, World War II, Korea, and tons of Vietnam guys. So I was used to seeing guys with Purple Hearts, and you'd see them in PT gear, like half of their left ass cheek was missing, and these guys were shot up. But what really brought it home for me was a book came out in the mid-'70s written by a Marine who was paralyzed. His name was Ron Kovic, and the title was Born on the 4th of July. And they later made a movie of it with Tom Cruise acting as Ron Kovic. But when you start reading, he was gung-ho, Marine, gung-ho, he's going, and he gets shot through the chest, severs his spinal cord, and now I think he's from like armpits below, he's paralyzed. And from that moment on in the book, it made me almost sweat. It was so graphically shocking about now he's in a VA hospital and he's not being paid attention to. Well, they made a movie of it. And when they got to that part in the movie of him in a VA hospital and, his IV is starting to run out and the attendant is goofing off, and it just, I wanted to throw up. And it reminded me of, and by the time I saw the movie, I had seen some combat, and I was headed for a little bit more. It just reminded me of the potential ugliness that in some cases, the lucky guys die. In other cases, we've got guys out there that have lost all limbs, both eyes, their jaws blown off, and they're alive today. Now, I will say this, I'm inspired because you've seen it too. You see guys and you look at them like, man, I wonder how I would react if that happened to me. And you see guys out there kicking ass, you know what I mean? They're just, they're running on artificial legs, and guy's only got one arm left, but he's doing pull-ups, so I admire that. But, without straying too far from the point, I think what you're trying to say is, hey, this is not a game. I mean, this is what I told a Marine friend of mine. He was an officer of mine. He went over to, as a battalion commander in Iraq. And the last thing I told him in an email was, remember, your enemy are guys that are staying up. They stay awake at night trying to think of ingenious and devious ways to kill Marines. And sadly, about 6 weeks later, that officer was killed. He was a battalion commander. Him and his sergeant major and the driver, the Humvee driver, were at a meeting in Anbar province with all the tribal sheiks. It was during the awakening. And so there was a huge meeting of the sheiks with the Marines and all of that. They were turning away from Al-Qaeda. And an insurgent dressed as an Iraqi policeman with a suicide vest under his uniform infiltrated the meeting and detonated the vest, killed my friend and the sergeant major outright, killed the driver a couple of days later, and he got a good number of those sheiks dead, killed dead. So it's kind of prophetic, but you would ordinary, it takes a certain mindset to be on guard for the person that is always trying to kill you and doesn't care if he gets killed in the process, and in fact may actively want to get killed in the process.
Yeah, more than happy to do it.
Yeah, it's a mindset for sure. Well, listen, I know you've had the good fortune to observe many combat leaders under various situations, Coleman. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind that, they're all races, all nationalities, different kind of units, the soft elements, conventional forces or whatever? Off the top of your head, are there any personal characteristics and traits that all of the good ones seem to have?
That's a great question, Mike. There's obviously the best way to do this is for me to think about a couple of people. And I'm going to go across a range of ranks and units here because of my soft background and my background in the joint environment. Let me talk about my bosses first. And both guys were 05s at the time that I'm thinking about them. One's an admiral now and one's retired. But I worked for an Army lieutenant colonel in the winter of 2007 and 2008. We were northeast of Baghdad by about 85 kilometers up in Baquba. And we were chasing after, if you remember, we killed Zarqawi in 2006. We were chasing after Zarqawi's replacement, a guy called AAM, who's dead now, but we didn't catch him. We caught a bunch of other characters up in the Diyala River Valley that winter. We were there for 120 days. 2 suicide bombers tried to blow up our troop. We got a dog shot. One of my buddies, Mark Carter, was killed halfway through deployment. He stepped on an IED buried inside of a courtyard of a house. We did about 60 combat operations in 120 days. You can do the math on how often we were out in the field.
Yeah.
It was a pretty hellacious tempo. And my boss, who I did not really know in garrison, was in Balad at the time. And so we were off in a different forward operating base, operating like a little joint task force. And so this example is not really a field example as much as it's a conceptual example. This Army lieutenant colonel had been in Somalia as a young second, first lieutenant. And this guy was technically and tactically proficient, Mike. He was calm and collected. So very much like the interpersonal, what we all hope to see in a great combat leader. Like, he didn't get rattled, but at the same time, I still have met less than 3 officers in my entire life who had such an ironclad will to take care of his troop commanders and support us in the field up and across the chain of command with adjacent units and with people above him. There was never a scenario where something happened. And as you know, Mike, a lot of crazy shit happens in combat.
Yeah.
That he didn't support us 100%. And as long as we were following what we needed to be following, the rules of engagement, the law of armed conflict, following his guidance. And so that was number one. A little lower level, though. It isn't always, to me, it wasn't always just about, he was calm under pressure and he was cool, in the gunfight. It was more of this, like, consistently deliberate focus, not inhuman focus on, my gear is always ready. I'm always studying the tactics. I'm trying to think 2 and 3 steps ahead. It's not the best physical guy. It's not always the guy who can do the most pull-ups. It's the person who seemed to have a extremely calm, measured approach to what I consider like the fundamental categories: tactics, techniques, and procedures, his physical and mental toughness, his association with teamwork and leadership. And I can talk about what I mean by association with team cohesion and leadership, and his mindset. The guys in my troop that were mindful of all those categories, not just I'm really good tactically and everything else is kind of a mess. They were able to go out night after night in a measured way, execute the job, see some horrendous shit, see some normal stuff, and somehow were able to approach the job in a way that wasn't so, for lack of a better term, it wasn't like just so extreme. It wasn't like some nights they're on and some nights they're off and some nights they're hyper and some nights they're calm. It would just, over time, people had developed an approach that was so professional that they weren't shocked or overly excited or overly disappointed by things that happen, you know?
Yeah, balanced leadership. You brought up a point, Coleman. I want to go one layer deeper on it. so much, and rightfully so much attention and praise is given to the guys kicking doors, departing friendly lines. But don't let me put words in your mouth, but you guys were very kinetic for most of your deployment that you just mentioned. And I've been gone from the military for 22 years, but I know enough to know that this still has to be true. I want to hear your thoughts. The only way you could depart friendly lines that many times as a viable fighting force is that you had really smart, aware commanders and support people in the rear knowing, hey, these guys are coming back in 3 hours. I think there's a chance they're going back out 6 hours from now. So we're going to have chow stage. We got their ammo stage. We got this. We got overlays made for them. We got all this, in other words, we're doing everything we can to enable them and facilitate the rapid turnaround, whether it be 2 hours or 2 days. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a tough position for personnel to be in, because I can imagine, I'll just use because my intelligence guys were, Mike, they were so good, it's hard to even describe how good they were.
Yeah,
it's
nice.
Like, if I'm in their position, even though they didn't choose our job, right? They chose their job and they love their job. But it's a grind to do what you just mentioned, for them to every day be anticipating. And it kind of goes back to my point about my observation of the best combat units, where it's tough for them to sit there in the rear, try to anticipate what we need, physically supply it, like just do the yeoman's work of giving you the stuff you need, from overlays to whatever, and then wonder if the troop commander and the platoon commander and equivalent of platoon sergeant or the first sergeant, if they're an erratic personality, are they going to come back, hyper one night, out of control, pissed off, who knows?
Yeah.
And why that demeanor of a great combat unit is that even-keeled demeanor, both in the field and in garrison, really enables the tempo of a troop or a platoon to operate effectively over the long term. Because of your point, those support personnel want and are doing a good job for the combat unit. You can't come back and blow them up, or, you need to understand that you're not going to be effective in the field without that team helping you.
Yeah. I have no ambush questions for you, Coleman, but I'm a fan of the SEALs. I remember talking to a SEAL officer that I knew mid-90s, and he had been an enlisted SEAL in Vietnam. So he was an LDO, and most of the SEAL officers I knew in my day, I would say more than half of them had been enlisted SEALs first. And this guy was an old salt. He insisted on wearing the silver trident instead of the gold one, because I think in the old days, the enlisted SEALs got silver tridents and the officers got gold. And that was he used to dig in to say, no, I'm the old salt. I'm on board, but this is my one eccentricity, But he told me that one of the most beneficial differences he saw in the attitudes of SEALs from his days in the 60s and 70s to the mid-90s was their appreciation and respectful treatment for support people. He said when he entered the teams, he was taught to literally call anyone without a trident a support puke. And that's what they were called and ridiculed. He said they would go in and he saw his chiefs and just berating the intel guys and all of that. And so naturally there was high turnover because intel guys and supply guys would, call get me the hell out of here, And then I don't know where it changed, but he said it was a distinct change. He kind of realized, these guys are on our team. Yeah. And this doesn't make sense. So I don't know who or what happened. But he said, I was guilty as charged. I was just a young SEAL. I did what I saw other people do. Didn't make sense, but I was too young and naive not to, to question it. He goes, looking back, I was like, what the hell were we thinking? Treating our support people like shit. And I think that was long gone by the time you entered. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because there are other youngsters, I call them, out there listening to it right now, and many of them are going to go on and earn, rightfully prestigious titles and, become members of high-speed units and all that. And they have every right to be proud of themselves on the chance that they won't get this bit of wisdom in their unit. What would you tell them about the need to respect everyone, and that the bin Laden raid was not just the guys in the helicopter? It was enabled by probably literally a couple thousand people when you total them all up. Any thoughts?
Oh, Mike, here's like the way I make this point most of the time. If you add up the amount of time that a hyper sexy, MARSOC unit, SEAL platoon, whatever, if you just do the clock time that unit is actually in a real gunfight over the course of their career, just start and stop the clock for every gunfight they're in and then add it up when they retire. It's not going to be that much time.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really short amount of time. And so don't pat yourself on the back too much here. Like the rest of your support crew, particularly your lift, who gets you there, your QRF, your direct and indirect gunfire support, your aviation support, your CAS, like the amount of time that they're doing their job, that are kind of like on standby to service you, it is way more time in the grand scheme of things than the amount of time you spend in a gunfight. Now, yes, the gunfight's got a lot more risk involved, but I think you understand what I'm saying, Mike, is the point is like people are putting in an extraordinary amount of work to get you out into the field to do something that you just don't do that much. And so, we're not riding in boats up and down the Mekong Delta anymore. And we're not fighting from the trenches. Like our actual like execution time is almost like, I don't know what the numbers are in a football game, but from whistle to whistle across a game, it's not that much time. It's very similar. And so just think about that when you're in the hyper sexy combat unit and you have the nice gear and you have the nice titles and it feels good to be on the tip of the spear. You actually don't do the lion's share of the work is the cold hard facts,
Yeah, that's, I don't know have you listened to any of Jocko Willink's podcasts?
No, I don't.
I listened to one, and he made a good point once that when he was in Iraq with his, I think his assistant platoon commander, I think as his business partner, he reminded his whole task force that, look, to your point, we have our own little area back here on the FOB, and we actually have air conditioning, and we've got showers, and we've got PlayStation and all that shit. The grunts that are supporting us, they don't have this shit. And those guys are actually sometimes out in the combat outposts for days or weeks at a time. Intel, spins us up. We go out and we kick ass, and we might be out for 24 hours at most, though there are aberrations to that. But he said, we may be out for 2 hours. So let's never look down on those guys, because in some cases, that PFC or corporal's actually got more trigger time than we have.
Absolutely. And we're not as fancy as we think we are, Mike. So here was my experience with this. And I knew better. I mean, I know what the Marine Corps does, right? I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy, essentially being trained by Marines cycling in and out, and a lot of my buddies. But here's my point, is that I was a platoon commander during the invasion of Iraq. And when we were living out of our Humvee for 6 weeks, embedded, as I mentioned, with the 1st Marine Division, the truth is not doing that much, because we're following tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles and huge companies of Marines, right? There's not much for us to do until we get to Baghdad. Well, on the way to Baghdad, maybe in week 3 or 4, some company calls us up there because they need extra snipers in their unit. So we're going to meet with a Marine Corps company somewhere. I don't remember exactly where we were at the time. We drive up there in our Humvees and we link up with this company, and the back door of, and you're going to have to correct me on the terminology, Mike, the back door of, I think, what was equivalent of a Bradley, Amtrak carrying like 12 or 15 guys. The back door of this thing opens up, right? And I get a glimpse inside of what these guys, how they've been living for the last 5 weeks. Mike, they don't have any water. They're out of MREs. And it was just a reminder that, you know, the hyper sexy units is, do we have to do some hyper dangerous missions sometimes that are different than a standard mission? Yeah, maybe sometimes, but bullets and rockets and grenades are agnostic to how sexy your unit is, you know? And so it was a great reminder for us. I mean, the only thing the guys wanted from us was extra water. They didn't have a complaint in the world. You could see in the guys' faces, they were probably 18, 19 years old. It was just a humbling moment and a realization that everybody is on a level playing field out here, and you got to support each other.
Yeah, well said. I want to talk about discipline, individual, you know, self-discipline and unit discipline, and the value of it once you do, you know, cross the line of departure. And, you know, I think that, you know, some experienced folks might be listening to this podcast, and, you know, I've been around a lot of frogmen, and some people will say, well, discipline is not exactly their hallmark. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Well, a lot of times it's because of, you know, I've never seen SEALs stand in formation with identical uniforms and all that. It's just not the culture. Now, that said, and you tell me, Coleman, I maintain that the difference between a shit-hot SEAL platoon and a mediocre or even worse platoon is the amount of individual and unit discipline, and if there's a culture of it or not among both of those units. Any thoughts?
Yeah, tons, obviously, Mike. It's a unique opportunity for, I'm never going to preach to a Marine about discipline, right? Tom Ripley and Doug Zembeck would kill me if I tried to say a SEAL platoon is as disciplined as a Marine Corps platoon. But Mike, you know, all joking aside, you know, so number one, the best units I were in are as disciplined as any other unit, right? A lot of it comes down to, what are you disciplined about?
Exactly.
Is it the demeanor of the troop commander or the platoon commander or the platoon chief or the leading petty officer that in the middle of Afghanistan at 9 feet into Kush that your boots are shined? If that's his idea of discipline, no. SEAL platoons are not disciplined about shining their boots.
Right.
If you're talking about, and I have 3 guys pictured in my mind, my team leaders in Iraq and Afghanistan who were in my troop, they were the most disciplined people about the things you and I have already brought up, Mike, the tactics, the techniques and procedures, how you get in and out of a target, how you analyze what your triggers to go on a given night are, how you use certain types of, you know, cast and fire on targets and direct and indirect and all the micro elements of, for lack of a better term, like executing the mission and staying alive doing it, hyper disciplined about that, where, you know, broadly speaking, where we don't do ourselves a favor in our community, just in general, as our forward facing image of discipline is garbage. It's terrible. And that's just the truth, you know? And so it's not, you know, that to me, for the sake of your podcast and the audience, discipline in the in-garrison stuff is very, very important to build a demeanor of what you have to carry into the field. But I would remind the whole audience, remember that do not burn up too much of your cognitive bandwidth. Again, just Coleman's opinion. Do not burn up too much of your cognitive bandwidth if you're really going into, and I'll just say, a post 9/11 situation. I only have Iraq and Afghanistan from 2001 till 2011, really as my heavy combat time. I didn't want to burn up a single calorie worrying about how my blouse looked in the field.
Yeah.
And so you just have to be mindful of that. You know,
now, we're saying the same thing. When the difference between, I think, Marine and SEAL discipline of exceptionally good units, I think, is zero. I do think the garrison culture is different between Marines and even conventional Army and various special ops units who have a more relaxed attitude, because quite frankly, a lot of times they're not following the same garrison routines, formation, marching to chow, and all of that conventional forces are. So we are definitely saying the same thing, and I hope the listeners pick up on that. Any Marine first sergeant that jacks up Marines in combat because their boots look like shit, and that guy is truly a Remph in the worst way. Now, I would expect that first sergeant or a corporal to go ballistic on a Marine if he found him with a rusty rifle.
100%.
Or realize that they left the wire and that squad leader did not supervise and make sure that all of his guys had the proper frequencies on the radio. That's what I'm calling discipline, and that's what really matters. And to a conventional troop, yes, haircuts and looking good in garrison, that's just the driver's license.
Yeah,
It's just a driver's license. And I think there are varying driver's licenses in the rear, but I wanted to bring it up because I think a lot of young folks are under the misconception that special operations forces don't care about discipline at all. And I'm saying, don't judge a book by its cover, because the stuff that you guys often get involved in, discipline and execution is your only hope. Thoughts?
And Mike, look, this is a caution too about conventional, semi-conventional special operations units. Here's this goes back to my point about how chaotic and aggressive and violent a real combat situation is what I don't want, what I would not want a young pre-combat experienced soldier of any type, sailor, soldier, whatever, doing is spending 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, say, before somebody clacks off, a bullet in his first gunfight. And that person has become so rigid in their approach simply because their in-garrison habits are so lockstep that when the shit hits the fan, they've built these habits no, I do number 1 and then I do number 2 and then I do number 3. You should hear General Toulon talk about the first turnover meeting that Doug Zembeck did in Fallujah. And what happened at the first meeting, you spoke about the situation with the sheikhs and your buddy being killed there, was the headquarters unit that was doing turnover with the Army unit that Doug's company was taking over for, was General Toulon's regiment at the time. They were in this meeting and it was a complete setup. They got mortared, guys got wounded. No one, not to my knowledge, does any soft or conventional unit in their train up cycle use a headquarters turnover meeting that gets mortared as a training element.
Yeah.
No. We run around the urban city and we go out into the desert and we do all these things in a certain way and we peel left and we peel right and we walk in an echelon. It's if that's our train up habit and it's not more a little looser, understanding of how complex the environment is, when you get mortared at the headquarters turnover, you don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And you just have to think about that,
Yeah. So this was a Marine unit turning over with an Army unit and they got mortared during that turnover.
Yep. The mortars start coming in from the outskirts of Fallujah. And now Captain Zembeck at the time, First Sergeant Skiles at the time, and I remember all the folks who were there. We actually had Doug's personal notebooks, Mike, so we kind of have a chronology of the event because we're really close to his parents and his wife Pam. Yeah. And so anyway, they're getting mortared and now they have to coordinate because they don't have enough vehicles at this turnover. Some of the vehicles are Army, some of the comms channels are Army, some of the vehicles are Marine Corps, half the units back at their FOB, and now they have to coordinate this medevac Casevac situation with vehicles only across 2 units who are just meeting each other for the first time. You show me where in the Navy, Marine Corps, Army training system, Mike, you stage that. You stage. Yeah. We not you. Everybody stages these very conventional training situations. Yeah. And then the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, it's like a nightmare scenario. If there's one seam of weakness, that is it right there. And amazingly, the enemy, they probably didn't know it, but they found it. And
right.
And boy, then it takes real nimble, agile-minded guys to cut through the fog and get the wounded out of there. Because the Marine system's not, do we use a Marine system, CASEVAC, or do we use the Army? And holy shit. So
and who owns the battle space?
Yeah.
So who's in charge? Right now, it's not turned over yet. So the Army owns a battle space. 3 Marines are wounded. 5 Army guys are wounded.
Yeah.
Set that up in training.
Well, that's a good one to talk about in the future. And I'll tell you, I'm sure with, I don't know Doug Zembeck, I know of him. I'm sure that things turned out better because of his presence there.
A couple guys, one of his platoon commanders, Lieutenant Ed Solis, was there at the time. I think he was on the turnover. I'd have to check the notes. But Doug had to, just because of his demeanor, he had to run up to the roof. So you got a company commander, and not because he's some hero, because they didn't have that many people at the turnover. It was a headquarters thing. And so, Doug's pulling guys down staircases who just got hit with mortars, and a lot of people were contributing. The point, Mike, is that, like, this thing we're talking about is it's very non-conventional. It's an unconventional thing to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely an example of fog of war, and how things are going to happen that you can never prepare for. Like, who would have thought of that?
No.
Who would have thought of that? I want to change gears a little bit, Coleman, and talk about mental toughness, which, your community is renowned for. There's a lot of people out there listening and say, okay, we got Coleman Scott here. He's a SEAL. SEALs are all about mental toughness. What's your definition of mental toughness as it applies to combat? As you know, there's a ton of mentally tough people, world-class athletes and all that, who probably would not be that mentally tough in combat. So what really matters is what does, I think you're going to say, the events in BUDS do a lot to bring out and surface and shape mental toughness. But what really matters is how mentally tough a frogman's going to be downrange in the future. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on mental toughness. What is it, and how can you develop it, if you can develop it?
I think you can develop it. I have a couple of short answers, and then we'll riff on this, and we'll make them longer answers, Mike. My definition, because since I got out 9 years ago, it's funny you bring up this topic specifically. If it's not the number one question I get asked just by anybody that I meet, dinner party, business engagement, whatever, guys like me and you, it's always the topic, because it's so hard to get your hands around mental toughness. But my definition of it in any scenario, in my married life, in my business life, in my combat life, before, is when your desire for mission accomplishment is greater than your desire for personal comfort. Say it again. When your desire for mission accomplishment, whatever that mission is greater than your desire for personal comfort. Here's how here's how Coleman knows when I'm teetering on the razor's edge. When I have something to say to Mike, I have something to say to a colleague, I have something to say to my kids, I have something to say to somebody in my troop or platoon, and I'm hesitating because I don't like the way it feels. I don't know if I want to tell them this thing. I don't know if I want to correct them. I don't know if whatever it is, as soon as and that applies obviously to physical events as well. This will go back to my point about, I think a big part about being successful in combat is understanding what it costs. I know I'm teetering on the edge of my mental toughness, either being tough or not being tough, if and when I ever choose my personal comfort over the desire for mission accomplishment. So let's get it closer to the field. You're out at a forward operating base. You're a young platoon commander. You're a young soldier, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And like you brought up a minute ago, Mike, got a little rust spot on the outside of your weapon. It's not on the inside. It's a little rusty on the outside, right? Or do I load up my GPS with my new nav, with my new routes for the mission we know we're going on tomorrow? Do I do it tonight or the morning? Right? Do I reload my gear tonight or the morning? Do I recheck my radio set? And you can go through a list of things. Every single time we choose something that's a little easier, it's a little personal comfort based over mission accomplishment, I think we're giving away a little mental toughness you die by 1,000 razor blade slices, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, in my case, in Navy special operations, if a guy doesn't come to it with training, where he figures it out real fast, and this is a story I always tell. I'm not going to make it a long story. It's a little longer, but in BUDS, it's surf torture. Like when the class has to sit in the water, and you know, Mike, that San Diego water never warms up. It certainly doesn't off the coast of Pendleton, nor does it in Coronado. When you have to sit in the water and just sit and suffer, you start to learn that you eat the elephant literally 60 seconds at a time, sometimes 5 seconds at a time. And that's a great example of choosing mission accomplishment over personal comfort. Because I can tell you, you've been in the water plenty, Mike. There is nothing comfortable ever about cold water.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously a metaphor, but this point about, being overseas and being forward and taking yourself or taking a troop or a unit into combat is you should constantly be asking yourself, what takes care of the mission and what takes care of me? Now, whole nother rabbit hole. We do have to take care of ourselves because we need to be able to do this for a long time. But most of us know when we're choosing personal comfort over mission accomplishment. And that's typically when I think we're giving away a little of our mental toughness, and giving away a chance to develop it and get used to those habits.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and see your thoughts are, Coleman. I agree with everything you said. And I say this, I think most combatants are mentally tough. Mm-hmm. So I'll pick on the Marines. I think most Marines are mentally tough. I have seen and am aware of some exceptionally mentally tough Marines that made fatal mistakes. It was either their life or the lives of others that it cost. They didn't get any less mentally tough. They had a lapse in judgment, and they started taking the easier route, which often is the more dangerous route, and it's exactly what the enemy's looking for, the shortcuts. And they're always watching, and they find out these guys they're dropping their guard about the last kilometer into the fob. And so we're going to whack them because they're not even manning. They're not even in a turret anymore. They're just totally disengaged about a click outside of friendly lines. And so that tough, the unit's still mentally tough and all that, but the commander and the junior leaders, I think, had lapses in judgment, and they allowed bad habits to drift in. So I think, well, let's hear what you think about that. I mean, I think we're saying the same thing, but have you seen examples like that?
Yeah, I mean, most accidents happen. So you probably know this, Mike, when I say it, but I'm affiliated with another unit called Mission Critical Team Institute. I'm not going to drag us down that rabbit hole, but still in the military today, most accidents and deaths don't happen overseas forward. They happen in training.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because we let down our guard, right? The shit hits the fan on exfil, right? When you're getting picked up, not when you're going in. And the other thing I think that we don't do ourselves a favor on, Mike, in all of our communities is we over-index or over-attach this mental toughness. Oh yeah, Mike Etor's a good dude, because what we really are, Mike, is we built up like a reservoir of physical toughness. It certainly makes us mentally tough, but when you're forward, your real mental toughness is in your mental agility to stay in the game over the long term. It's not just Mike and Coleman are tough former wrestlers. Yeah, well, we know we're tough. That's not the point. The point is, can we infill in a disciplined way? Can we execute in a disciplined way? Can we exfil in a disciplined way? Can we plan in a disciplined way? Can we decide things in a disciplined way? Then you're talking about a unit that's going to the next level, not just I have a weapons platoon that's, they can do 1,000 pull-ups. Well, after 6 pull-ups, 12, whatever, it doesn't really matter that much. What I need you to do is be on during exfil so that we don't get ambushed, a kilometer from the base.
Yeah, your words are very wise, and just a natural, almost on cue segue into the next topic I'd like to touch on is physical conditioning. And the SEAL community is rightfully renowned for physical conditioning. I mean, I think that, I'll give you a chance to talk, obviously, but I mean, you've seen, what students look like and what they're physically and athletically capable of at the end of buds. But I'd be willing to say that you're going to say they're physical monsters at that time, probably in the best condition they've ever been and ever will be. But they are far from being physically ready for the demands of extended combat in 120 degrees heat or climbing the mountains in Afghanistan. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, Mike. Just because I was first phase instructor and, ran those hell weeks, the people who came to our training, at least, that were typically the fastest people to quit, like quitting the first week of training, were former D1, not D1 athletes, actually a lot of pro triathletes we'd see quit in the first week. They got all the physical gifts. I just have this one memory of a guy who came into the class, the first class I was an instructor for. And in the first week of training, he set all the BUD/S records for the obstacle course, the 2-mile ocean swim, and the 4-mile timed run on the beach. He set all the course records, and he quit 3 days later. And so, and similarly, look, I've done all the stuff, like from wrestling to circuit training to, I still like high intensity workouts and long distance stuff, and you name it. So I'm not taking shots at anybody, but one of the things I know in 2005 that I thought hurt our community was this addiction to the CrossFit stuff, because we had students come into training who were like, I don't even know what the stuff's called. I can do the Helen or the Fran or whatever these things are in like 8.5 minutes. I can do all these reps. And I'm like, okay, awesome. So you're fit like a wrestler, because a wrestling match, 9, 10, 11 minutes, depending if you go to overtime. But when I take you to 9,000 feet in the middle of Afghanistan, you have to be out for 10 hours in a cycle of darkness. You're garbage. Like, I can't use you, And so I think as let's again stick with the theme, as combat leaders forward, what you want to do, I was just talking to my community about this the other day, is training is one thing, in garrison is one thing, our platoon and company workouts are one thing, but you need to look ahead at what kind of environment you're going to be working in and backwards plan what you need that race car to do.
Yeah.
And if the race car is going into the mountains of Afghanistan, you better put your CrossFit stuff aside and start, walking a long way with a lot of weight.
Yeah.
It's a tough environment.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I use analogies like that too. If you're training thoroughbred racehorses in the rear, but where you're deploying, if the AO is calling for Clydesdales and draft horses, you're in trouble. You're in trouble because the racehorses obviously are not built to bear those loads. So, a common principle that I was always taught, this isn't mine, it was always taught to me in the Marine Corps, and I always stress it to other people, is, you got to pay attention when it comes to physical training and preparing for combat. It should generally be in wearing the same uniform and bearing the same loads, and ideally over the same terrain and the same conditions that you're going to be operating in. Yep. Because the Marine Corps is full of stories of what I call the silk shorts runners, the guy that can max the PFT, but after 4 or 5 days or a week or so of blistering heat, and he's dehydrated and got shitty food and not a lot of sleep, those guys often turn into physical liabilities.
Absolutely they do.
While some non-impressive kid who might even be 15 pounds, a little bit sludgy around the middle, I mean, that guy is a Clydesdale. I mean, he is just a draft horse. He's just hauling that base plate, and he's picking up somebody else's load as well. He's just, he surfaces. So I think what we're trying to tell folks here is, and I'm all about PT. Same with you. I mean, I'm a lifelong PT. I'm all about it. It helps you prepare, but I would urge people never to confuse peacetime athletic achievements and PT capability with combat endurance capability or probability. Any thoughts, Coleman?
Combat endurance, Mike, you're right on, and look, I'll try it all. Like, I just like to have fun. I'm just a physical person, right? I'll do whatever guys want to do. But when you're going overseas, if you know you're going to be in sustained combat for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, 1 year, whatever it's going to be, make no mistake, you are walking for hours at a time, and then you have minutes of incredible intensity, and the gunfight will die down or it won't, and you'll have another couple of minutes of incredible intensity, and then you're going to walk another 3 to 4 to 5 hours to get out. And then you're going to need to stretch and rest and recover, because the next night you're going to walk another 6 hours and have 2 to 3 minutes of intensity. And you're going to walk another 5 hours on exfil, right? That's how it works.
Yeah. And, I know conventional forces, people, we have a lot of peacetime, warriors right now. And I've talked to a bunch of them, and they, like most, they just despise going on those force marches, the humps, like how is this going to pay off in combat? And I always tell them, well, there's more on a 15-mile hump than just humping 15 miles. I'd rather run 15 miles than hump 15 miles.
Me too.
And there's a reason why elite units almost always incorporate prolonged endurance marches as part of their selection processes, because once you're chafed and you got blisters on your blisters, and your feet feel hot and all that, it's an act of will just to put one foot in front of the other. So I've always told commanders, if you have a limited training cycle and you have a choice between 6 PT days, and you can either hump them or run them, I say hump them every time. Because the mental benefits are, I think, in many cases, superior than the physical benefits.
There's no question, Mike. There's a couple, I'm here in Annapolis, Annapolis, Maryland, near DC, and there's been a couple guys, lacrosse players from the University of Maryland, the highest D1 athletes in lacrosse you can find in the country. There's been 3 of them now that have joined the teams, gone in, graduated buds are in the teams now, great young guys. And when I first met with them, just through like people that I knew in the area and introduced me and said, hey, this guy Coleman lives here now, and he used to be a buds instructor in the team. So I shared some advice with them and worked out with them a little. And one of the first things, I was curious about what their fitness programs were like. And a lot of it, D1 college athletics is very similar.
Yeah.
And I said, guys, get a backpack. Before you think about going to training, or as you're thinking about preparing for training, fill a backpack with minimum 40 pounds of gear. You don't need to go crazy. Don't kill yourself.
Yeah.
Drive out past Luray Caverns, past DC, and go to the Shenandoah Valley. And 3 days, walk the Appalachian Trail. 2 nights and 3 days. And every micro irritation in your nice, cozy tennis shoes is going to be amplified by 10x when you get to training. So get out of the gym. Like, I love the gym, but get out of the gym for a second, because you're going to take one step into the real world when you go to training. And then when you go overseas, you're going to take another big step into the real world. And you need to start preparing yourself for that. And the deadlift bar and the sit-up machine in the gym ain't going to cut it.
No, I agree entirely. And, I want to make sure people understand, I'm speaking for myself. I am pro PT. I love PT.
Oh, absolutely.
I still daily PT, and I know you are too. In fact, I say this, so you're the next in a long line of special operators I've told this to. I do think sometimes conventional guys get a warped sense of, well, I'm a PT stud, therefore I'm going to do great in combat. And of course, most of the soft units are full of PT studs, and I think sometimes they. And we're largely in peacetime again, so sometimes even they can get lulled into a sense of security that a physical beast is going to be a combat beast. And so I've always told soft guys that I dare you to point out any incident in the history of U.S. Special Operations Forces that an operator was ever killed by an enemy soldier that was fitter, faster, stronger than him.
Great point, Mike.
And that scrawny little Taliban that weighs 135, he has the discipline to wait behind that boulder for 2 days. He's got no food. He's got flip-flops. It's 30 degrees and he's got flip-flops.
If that.
But he pulled the trigger on an AK, and I don't give a shit how many pull-ups and push-ups you can do. if that round hits you in the side where your plate isn't, you're going to die probably.
Doesn't matter.
And it doesn't matter how big and thick your pecs are. And again, we're pro PT, but we're just trying to put it in perspective. I don't think any SEAL, Delta, SF, Marine, whatever, I don't think they've ever been killed by somebody physically 50% of their level, much less fitter.
Not even close. Yeah.
So the 762 respects no pecs, it's just, it is the way it is. It brings me to my next topic, Coleman. And you've seen this, we've got, combat warriors, future combat warriors out there. And I'd like you to tell them how could you prepare them for the shocking visualization of what they're going to see when they see their first wounded in KIA. I mean, it's, I always thought that I think the military's done a lot better with it post 9/11. In my day, we did almost nothing. Our, first aid was kind of bullshit and all of that. And I have literally seen Marines seeing a Marine or another human being shot and kind of ripped up for the first time. And if you're not prepared for that, it is shocking to the point where it often causes people to kind of freeze. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of thoughts on all these topics, Mike, obviously. And a good buddy of mine, Mark Carter, we called him Badger. He was killed Doug was killed in May of 2007. I wasn't with Doug. I deployed later that year. And a good buddy of mine, Mark Carter, was killed, just for context for the group here, about 50 feet away from me. He was inside a compound. I was outside in the street. This is in December of 2007. And in terms of losing teammates and the reality of the job that we choose, Mike, and then in the spring of 2008, after we got home from Bakuba, my troop chief, a guy named Tommy Valentine, he was killed in a parachute accident in Marana, Arizona. And I was me and another guy did the casualty notification to his parents. And then a couple months later, two guys I went through buds with were killed overseas in Iraq. And, I wasn't there for that. We went to their memorials. And then a buddy of mine was killed in the spring of 2010. And I was the casualty notification to his wife. This is Adam Brown. The book Fearless is about Adam. And then in 2011, we lost Extortion 17, which was a bunch of guys in that helicopter were in my Hell Week boat crew. And so this is all to say that never once did a senior enlisted, a senior officer, a field grade officer, anybody at the U.S. Naval Academy, nobody, Mike, ever said, Coleman, like, this is what it's going to be like when you see it and when you feel it and when you experience it. And I'm not blaming anybody about that. I'm just sharing my experience honestly. And so after Doug was killed in 2007 and then and Mark was killed in December of 2007 on our deployment, and seeing it and experiencing it, physically and emotionally, I suppose the only way I can describe it for a listener to viscerally consider it is go walking outside. Don't do this, right? If you're outside walking your dog and somebody walks up and shoots your dog right next to you. And so whatever that looks like and whatever that feels like, amplify that by 10x. And here's, I think, a healthy phenomenon. Again, I'm one man's experience about the human experience in general, Mike, that protects us and then shocks us is it doesn't matter how much we train and how much we know and how much we run the visualization in our mind. We just don't think it's going to happen to us or a teammate. And when it does, in a way, you just can't believe it. And for a second, you're thinking to yourself, like, no. Like, this is a movie. Like, this will all stop in the next 5 seconds and everything's going to be okay. And everything isn't okay. Like, this is the job you choose when you go into an infantry unit or a special operations unit that spends their time in direct action. Is people don't like to use the words that I'm going to use, but we can now because I'm out and no one will think anything of me. I suppose it's scary and it's debilitating and it's frustrating and all the words I would have never said in the unit. And just try to think about it before it happens, but even that's not going to be good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I remember being on the staff of the basic school 92 to 95, and we were hurting for combat experience there. So by virtue of my very limited combat experience, I was put on the combat panel. I would talk to all the TBS classes. And I told them, first of all, I'm barely qualified to be here. And my combat panel, when I was a lieutenant, I think everybody on the combat panel had at least 3 Purple Hearts, and 4 of the 5 were Navy Cross recipients. So this was a combat panel. But I remember one of them had the presence of mind. His name was, he retired as a major general, recon legend named Wayne Rawlings, Rollings. He actually was a unique guy. He set the Guinness World Book of Sit-Ups. Only to have a Russian beat him. He found out about it, was infuriated, went into training, and another year and a half, he went and beat the Russian again, you know. But he received the Navy Cross for doing a prisoner snatch mission into North Vietnam. And they got a patrol, ambushed a patrol, and got a live one, and he was an officer. And, of course, now they were compromised. They spent the next 2 days kind of running through the jungle, avoiding the battalion that was after them until they could get a helo in to do the extract. And he told, so this guy was been there, done that. He was widely respected by all, and rightfully so. He told us, look, if you go into combat, you will see casualties. And he said, how many of you have ever gone deer hunting? And, a good portion of the class raised their hand. Let's say half of the kids raised their hand. And he said, how many of you, so you know what the inside of a deer looks like? And they said, yes. He goes, so there's all sorts of colors, and when you cut that open, sometimes the intestines fall out and all of that. He said, that's what a human being looks like, except it's a lot messier if that human being gets hit by a 50 cal or a landmine, and you just have to be aware of that. It doesn't happen as antiseptically as you see in the movies. Shit's going to get splashed all over. You're going to have, blood on you. You're going to have certain smells and sounds. And I never forgot that. And I passed that lesson. I used to tell the students, I'm telling you a story that General Rawlings told my class. And I had a Marine colonel contact me about a year ago who was a student during that combat panel. And he said, I never forgot what you told me. And I've said it countless times to Marines prior to going in combat. And I had guys come up to me and say, your story about the deer and colors and things that you never saw before coming outside of a man, that really helped me. It shocked me, but it probably got me engaged again much faster than me just looking like, what in the hell is that? So I think what we're trying to do, I know what we're trying to do here is warn the young warriors out there that it's not like it is in Rambo or whatever, where a guy gets shot and dies instantly and very little blood and all that. And especially something I never had to deal with, Coleman, and I'm sure you did, the IEDs, which, people rolling over a couple of 155s, made into a charge. I mean, that cannot be a good sight to see.
Yeah, I mean, and for the listeners in the audience who fact checked us, as you should, is I am the furthest thing from have seen the worst, Mike. But Mark, that's exactly Mark Carter. Thankfully, in a way, when he stepped on that houseborne IED, it was a buried 155, and he died instantly. And so Mark didn't really suffer in that sense. But the type of job that people are choosing who are going to go into a ground combat unit. So you hear me say it, and like I mentioned, I haven't seen the worst. And the truth is I haven't been the furthest forward compared to a lot of people that you'll speak to on this podcast, Mike.
Sure.
But it'll change for the people going into these units. It's going to change you forever, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Our time is coming short here, Coleman, but I want to ask you, they're out there and they have the same eternal question that you had and I had and that warriors have had for millennia. And they're out there right now saying, I'm listening to Coleman. I'm listening to a bunch of guys on this podcast, these episodes. And various levels of combat, but they've all gotten through it. When it happens to me, am I going to be able to do it? Am I going to be okay? And what would you tell them?
I would say it depends on what you're willing to pay. And I don't think I'm Mr. Mental Toughness. If I ever figured out, I think Mike, in a lot of ways, like, I got lucky. And again, I'm not the furthest forward, because I was never enlisted, and I was never the first guy in the door, and I was never on the recce unit. But when we were all in it together, I realized, like you mentioned earlier, 7.62s do not discriminate on how big you are and how fast you are and where you come from and how fast you can run or swim. But you do have to decide what you're willing to pay. And so if you're wondering if you're going to do okay or if you're going to be good in a gunfight, what I would say is you have to commit fully to whatever your unit is doing. Like, if you have played a sport or done something in your life that has required you to take this little bundle of fear and nerves that is saying, I don't really know what's going to happen because the worst could happen, is my recommendation is you accept that fear for what it is. You stuff it in your pocket and you bring it with you at 100% effort, because anything less could cost you your life if you're not fully committed to the situation. I think British writer G.K. Chesterton has a great quote that's actually in the little book by Captain Adolf von Schell, Battle Leadership, which I'm sure you've seen, right? And
Classic.
the quote is classic book. And G.K. Chesterton's quote is, the irony about combat is you have to be a little bit careless with your life in order to save it. You have to be a little bit careless with your life in order to save it. And so I think it's a matter of understanding what it might cost you. And to me, that was the most important thing, because from my perspective, Mike, I always played this game with myself on any given night, that we got on a helicopter somewhere in Iraq, knowing that we could have been down by an RPG, or we could have stepped on an IED, or we could have been ambushed, or anything could have happened. I played this game with, like, when we step on a helicopter, this is a bizarre thing to say, but it's true, is I do not have a life at home. I do not have an in-garrison job. Like, this is who I am and this is what I do.
Yeah.
And that creates, I know we're not talking about transitioning out, but that creates a little bit of a dangerous situation when you decide to get out. My point is you have to fully commit, and otherwise you won't do the job as you would hope to do and that you want to do,
Yeah, wisely said. Well, tell us a little bit, before we let you go, tell us a little bit about what you are involved. I know you're involved with some charitable causes, and we'd like to hear a little bit about your business and how can people contact you if they want to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So charitable stuff. The Commit Foundation is a transition organization. The Station Foundation is a transition organization. They're both out in Bozeman, Montana, coincidentally, but operate all over the country. Station Foundation is run by a guy named Kevin Stacy, who was a TF-160th pilot and West Point grad. And then Commit Foundation was founded by a guy named Guy Filippelli, Army officer, and a woman named Anne-Marie Craig, who's married to a former Army Ranger. And that's the transition services charity side of my life. I was involved with a group called Carry the Load. It's out of Dallas, Texas, back in 2012. They do all Memorial Day events. And we walked a flag from the cemetery on West Point all the way to Dallas, Texas. It took us 26 days, over 1,750 miles.
Wow.
It was a great event. They still do it every year. So there's that. There's the Mission Critical Team Institute with my colleague, Dr. Preston Klein, who has spent a decade researching teams like us and trauma surgeons and fighter pilots and urban and wildland firefighters. And that's a long story, but we also do a show called the Teamcast, which people can listen to. And I have a business side of my life, as you know, Mike, with Tom Ripley. Tom hired me to help turn around a manufacturing company here in Maryland back in 2014, which we subsequently sold. And then we bought some other businesses together. And Tom has been a great mentor and a friend in that regard. So I tend to have 5 or 6 different pieces of my life at any one time, which is fun, but sometimes exhausting. I enjoy all of it. But if people want to find me, from time to time, I'll post something on a newsletter on my website. ColemanRuiz.com is just set up like a running blog, really. I wrote some stuff during COVID called like what it's actually like on deployment, because I was really worried about my teammates and colleagues in medicine because they were truly going on a deployment. And so there's my website, and you can contact me there. And and if anybody is interested more in about this conversation, Mike, you know where to find me. So, we can continue to help people however makes sense for them.
Yeah, outstanding. Well, you've certainly shared a lot of your experiences and insights and lessons learned. I think that it's going to be a popular episode, and I humbly ask that you consider coming back again in the future, Coleman.
For sure. And for the listeners and for yourself as well, Mike, let me know if there's somebody in my network that you want on that I can help get on your podcast for the benefit of the young warriors, going to choose this.
Absolutely. Well, if there's anybody listening out there, this is not a Marine podcast. It's not an officer podcast. It's a podcast for experienced combat vets. And that can be ranging from one firefight to the guy's been at Quezon being shelled by thousands of rounds of arty every day. We want to pass on the lessons and insights of combat vets to the next generation of warrior, next several generations of warrior, actually. So thank you again, Coleman. It's been a blessing, and we are rounds complete for this podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at combatleadership.com. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient philosopher Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war.